Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Softly Spoken English. I'm Sophia, and I'm so happy you've decided to spend a few minutes with me today. I hope you're feeling relaxed and ready for another gentle English conversation. Today, I'd like to talk about three very small words that can sometimes feel surprisingly confusing: still, yet, and already. The good news is that they're much easier than they seem. Have you ever heard someone say, "I'm still working"? "Have you finished yet?" Or, "I've already seen that movie," and wondered why they chose those particular words? You're certainly not alone. These expressions appear in everyday conversations all the time, but many learners aren't completely sure when to use each one. Today we'll explore them together in a simple and natural way. Instead of thinking about grammar rules, I'd like you to imagine a normal day. From the moment you wake up until you go to bed, there are dozens of opportunities to use still, yet, and already. That's one of the reasons I enjoy teaching these words. They're not just part of English, they're part of everyday life, and once you notice them, you'll start hearing them everywhere. Let's begin with the idea behind these three words. They're all connected to time. They help us describe whether something is continuing, whether it has happened before we expected, or whether we're still waiting for it to happen. Once you understand that simple connection, choosing the right word becomes much more natural than trying to memorize grammar rules. Let's start with still. Imagine it's early in the morning and you send a message to a friend. They don't reply for a while because they're working. Later you ask, "Are you still working?" In this sentence, still tells us that the activity began earlier and hasn't finished yet. The work is continuing, and that's the key idea behind this little word. You'll hear still in many everyday situations. "I'm still waiting for the bus." "She's still asleep." "We're still thinking about it." In every example, something started before this moment and is continuing now. I think that's one of the easiest ways to remember it. Whenever something hasn't finished, there's a good chance still might be the perfect word to use. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever been waiting for a message that never seemed to arrive? Maybe you checked your phone once, then twice, then a few more times. A friend asks, "Have they replied?" And you answer, "No, I'm still waiting." It feels like such a natural response because you're describing something that hasn't changed. You're waiting, and that situation is continuing. Now let's move on to our second word, yet. While still often talks about something that's continuing, yet usually appears when we're talking about something that hasn't happened, but we expect it to happen. Imagine you're getting ready to leave the house, and someone asks, "Have you had breakfast yet?" They're simply asking if that moment has happened or not. You'll hear yet most often in questions and negative sentences. For example, "I haven't finished yet," or "Has the movie started yet?" There's a feeling of expectation. We believe the action will happen, just not at this moment. Once you notice that idea, yet becomes much easier to recognize in everyday conversations. Here's a little exercise for you. Think about your morning today. Have you had lunch yet? Have you answered all your messages yet? Have you finished everything you wanted to do? Even if your answer is no, you've probably just used yet in your mind without realizing it. That's exactly how language becomes natural, by connecting it to your own life. One thing I really like about yet is that it often creates a sense of anticipation. Imagine you're waiting for a friend who's running late. You might look at your watch and say, "She isn't here yet." You know she'll probably arrive soon, but at this moment, you're still waiting. It's such a small word, but it adds an important feeling to the sentence. Can you already see the difference between still and yet? They sometimes appear in similar situations, but they focus on different ideas. Still emphasizes that something is continuing, yet emphasizes that something hasn't happened so far. It's a small distinction, but once you understand it, you'll start hearing it everywhere. Now let's look at our third word, already. I think this is one of the most satisfying words in English because it often brings good news. Imagine your friend asks, "Have you finished your homework?" And you smile and say, "I've already finished." It tells the other person that the action happened before they expected, or simply before this moment. You'll hear already in many everyday situations. I've already eaten. She's already left. We've already booked the hotel. In every example, something has been completed. Instead of waiting for it to happen, you're saying it has happened sooner than expected, or that it's no longer something you need to worry about. Have you ever sent someone a reminder, only for them to reply, "Oh, I've already done it"? It happens all the time. Maybe you remind a friend to buy milk and they answer, "I already bought it this morning." Without thinking about grammar, they're simply telling you the task is finished. That's why already feels so useful in everyday conversations. Let's compare our three words with one simple situation. Imagine you're cooking dinner. While the food is in the oven, you might say, "It's still cooking." Someone asks, "Is it ready yet?" And you answer, "No, not yet." A few minutes later, you smile and say, "It's already done." One situation, three words, and each one has a different job. I love examples like this because they show that you don't need complicated grammar explanations. You simply need to understand what's happening. Is something continuing? Use still. Has it not happened so far? Use yet. Has it already happened? Then already is probably the word you're looking for. Here's a little challenge for you. Think about your day so far. What's something you're still doing? What's something you haven't done yet? And what's something you've already finished? You don't have to answer out loud. Just take a moment to think about your own routine. I think you'll remember these words much more easily when they're connected to your own experiences. One of the things I enjoy most about these words is that they often appear together in real conversations. Imagine you're meeting a friend for coffee. They ask, "Have you ordered yet?" You reply, "No, I'm still deciding." A few minutes later, the waiter arrives and you smile, "I've already chosen." That's exactly how naturally these three words work together. Have you noticed that we're not memorizing rules today? Instead, we're following little moments that happen in everyday life. I think that's one of the best ways to learn English. When words are connected to real situations, they stop feeling like grammar and start feeling like communication. Let's imagine another situation. You're waiting for a train that's running late. Your friend sends you a message asking, "Has the train arrived yet?" You answer, "No, I'm still waiting." 10 minutes later, you send another message. "It's already here." Without changing the story, you've naturally used all three words again. Sometimes learners worry about making mistakes with these expressions, but I'd like you to remember something. Native speakers aren't thinking about grammar rules while they're talking. They're thinking about the situation. If you focus on what's happening rather than the rule itself, choosing the right word becomes much easier. Here's something I'd like you to try this week. Every time you hear still, yet, or already in a movie, a podcast, or a YouTube video, pause for a second and ask yourself, why did they choose that word? I think you'll quickly notice the same patterns we've been talking about today. The wonderful thing about learning English this way is that every conversation becomes a lesson. You don't have to stop and study every sentence. You simply begin noticing little details. Over time, those little details become habits, and one day you'll find yourself saying, "I'm still working," or "I've already done it," without even thinking about it. Let's imagine you're planning a holiday with a friend. They ask, "Have you booked the flights yet?" You reply, "Not yet. I'm still comparing prices." The next day, they send another message, and this time you happily answer, "I've already booked everything." Doesn't that feel like a real conversation? That's exactly why these words are so useful. I think many learners make English feel more difficult than it really is. We sometimes imagine that every sentence has a complicated rule behind it. But with words like still, yet, and already, the real question isn't about grammar. It's about the story you're telling. Once you understand the story, the right word often comes naturally. Here's another situation you might recognize. You're watching your favorite TV series and someone asks, "Have you seen the new episode yet?" Maybe you answer, "No, not yet. I'm still finishing the previous season." A few days later, someone asks again, and now you can proudly say, "Yes, I've already watched it." The same conversation changes as time moves forward. Have you ever noticed how often we talk about things that are in progress, things we're waiting for, or things we've just completed? We do it every single day. That's why these three words appear so frequently. They're not advanced vocabulary. They're simply part of everyday communication. And once they become familiar, your English starts to sound much more natural. Sometimes students ask me if there's a shortcut for remembering these words. I like to think of them this way. Still looks at something that's continuing, yet looks forward to something that hasn't happened, and already looks back at something that's finished. It's not a grammar formula. It's simply a different way of looking at time. Now, I'd like you to think about your own day again. Are you still working on something? Is there anything you haven't done yet? Or maybe you've already completed your biggest task for today. I love asking these kinds of questions because they remind us that English isn't separate from our lives. It's simply another way of talking about the moments we experience every day. Let's imagine you're getting ready for a trip. The night before, you check your suitcase one last time. You ask yourself, "Have I packed my passport yet?" Then you remember it's already inside your bag. As you're about to leave, you look around the house and think, "I'm still missing one thing." Can you see how naturally these words fit into everyday moments? I think one of the nicest things about learning English is when you stop translating every sentence. Instead of thinking, "Which word should I use?" you simply think about what's happening. Is the action continuing? Has it not happened yet? Or is it already finished? When you focus on the meaning first, speaking becomes much more relaxed. Here's another conversation you might hear at work. A colleague asks, "Have you sent the email yet?" You answer, "I'm still checking it. I want to make sure everything looks right." Later in the afternoon, they ask again, and this time you smile and say, "Yes, I've already sent it." It's such a simple exchange, but it's exactly how these words are used every day. Have you noticed that these three words often help us avoid repeating longer explanations? Instead of saying, "The task started earlier and hasn't finished," we simply say, "I'm still working on it." Instead of saying, "The task has been completed before now," we say, "I've already finished." Small words can carry a lot of meaning. I'd like you to try something the next time you watch a film in English. Don't focus only on the main dialogue. Listen carefully to the little words people use between the bigger sentences. I think you'll be surprised by how often you hear still, yet, and already. They're everywhere because they're part of everyday thinking, not just everyday speaking. And remember, you don't need to master all 3 words today. If you leave this episode understanding their basic idea a little better than before, that's already wonderful. Language learning doesn't happen in one big moment. It happens through hundreds of small moments like this, where one idea becomes just a little clearer than it was yesterday. Sometimes, these 3 words can even change the feeling of a conversation. Imagine you've been waiting for a friend at a restaurant. You look at your watch and think, she's still not here. A few moments later, someone asks, has she arrived yet? Just as you start to answer, you see her walking through the door. You smile and say, she's already here. The whole story changes in just a few minutes. One thing I find interesting is that we don't usually notice these words when we're speaking our own language. We use them automatically because they simply help us describe time. English works in exactly the same way. Once these expressions become familiar, you won't stop to think about them anymore. They'll simply become part of the way you communicate. Here's another little challenge for you. As you go through the rest of your day, try asking yourself 3 simple questions. What am I still doing? What haven't I done yet? What have I already finished? You don't even need to say the answers out loud. Just thinking about them in English is already great practice. Have you ever noticed that learning becomes much easier when you stop trying to memorize and start trying to notice? That's one of my favorite ways to study English. Instead of filling your notebook with long grammar rules, you begin collecting little moments from real life. And before you know it, those moments become natural sentences that you can use without hesitation. I also want you to remember that making mistakes is part of learning. If one day you use still when yet would sound more natural, don't worry too much about it. The important thing is that you're communicating. Every conversation teaches you something, and every time you hear these words used by other people, your understanding becomes a little stronger. When I think about these 3 words, I don't think about grammar anymore. I think about everyday life. Waiting for a friend, finishing a book, cooking dinner, replying to a message. That's why I believe they're worth learning. They're not just useful for passing an English test. They're useful for talking about the little moments that fill our days. Let's imagine it's the weekend, and you're making plans with a friend. They send you a message asking, have you decided where you'd like to go yet? You reply, I'm still thinking about it. An hour later, after looking at a few places, you write back, I've already made a decision. It's such a simple conversation, but it shows how naturally these words fit into everyday life. One thing I hope you'll remember after today's episode is that language isn't just about vocabulary. It's also about noticing patterns. Once you begin paying attention, you'll realize that still, yet, and already appear in conversations far more often than you probably imagined. They're small words, but they quietly help us organize our thoughts as we speak. Have you ever experienced that wonderful moment when something you've been studying suddenly starts appearing everywhere? Maybe you learn a new expression in English, and then you hear it in a movie that same evening. I have a feeling the same thing will happen with these 3 words. Now that we've talked about them, I think you'll start noticing them much more often. And that's one of my favorite parts of learning a language. You don't always feel yourself improving from one day to the next. Instead, little by little, your ears become more attentive. Your confidence grows quietly. Then one day, without even thinking about it, you'll naturally say, I'm still working, I haven't finished yet, or I've already done that. That's real progress. Before we finish, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Don't worry about trying to use all three words perfectly every single time. Instead, choose one situation today where you can use still, yet, or already naturally. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is becoming a little more comfortable with English every time you use it. Before we finish today's episode, I'd like to leave you with one simple idea. Don't try to memorize still, yet, and already as grammar rules. Instead, start listening for them in your everyday life. The next time you watch a movie, listen to a podcast, or have a conversation in English, I have a feeling you'll notice these little words much more often than you did before. And when you do notice them, don't just think about the words themselves. Think about the moment. Ask yourself, is something continuing? Am I waiting for something to happen? Or has it already happened? Those simple questions will help you understand the meaning naturally, without needing to stop and remember complicated rules. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I hope this episode has helped you feel a little more comfortable using these 3 everyday words. Remember, learning English doesn't have to feel overwhelming. Sometimes understanding just a few small words can make your conversations feel much smoother and much more natural. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being here. I always enjoy sharing these quiet moments with you, and I hope you'll join me again for our next episode. Until then, take care, keep practicing, and most importantly, enjoy the journey. I'll see you in the next episode.